Hi, and welcome to this episode of Empowered Entrepreneur. Today, my guest is Coach Ellyn. She is a burnout coach. Hi, Ellyn. How are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm so glad we just decided to start recording because I feel like we are going to start diving into things that were really, really pertinent. I'm really happy that you're having me on here. I love talking about entrepreneurship and burnout and all those things.
Yes, yes. So we were just summarizing how we started of not knowing what we
hmm
wanted to do, but we wanted to be our own boss.
hmm Yeah.
And it's
Yeah. Should I
definitely a
just keep
journey.
diving into that story?
Yes, please do.
Yeah, I mean, you were about to say it. It's definitely a journey. And I feel like, some entrepreneurs are blessed coming into, starting their business and stepping into the world of entrepreneurship and they know exactly what they want to do. And some entrepreneurs are not. It's a little bit of figuring it out that happens at the start. And that's as we were kind of both reminiscing about, that's how we both started. My background is in science. My background is not in entrepreneurship. I joke all the time, they do not teach business and biology programs because I was a biologist. But my background is very much like tied to what I do now because when I was in school and my just kind of personality and whatnot, I had a tendency toward burning myself out. I had a tendency toward overcommitting myself and overwhelming myself and overscheduling myself. It was just like my MO, like since I was a teenager, because I'm a firm believer that a lot of us build those bad habits starting when we're teenagers. And it all kind of came to a head when I was in graduate school. And that was the first time I experienced burnout. So when that colored entrepreneurship and that colored coaching for me. The whole reason why I got into coaching and got into this world is because of my own experiences with burnout and all the cookie cutter BS we see online about how to help yourself through burnout, like work less, sleep more, quit your job. And I was just like, I'm sleeping a ton. B, I can't work less. And C, like, quit my job and do what? Like, it was so unhelpful. So I like started diving into stuff, but, even in burnout, it's so multifaceted. There's productivity aspects of it. There's mindset aspects of it. As we were kind of talking about your former iterations of focusing on mindset, like there's mindset aspects to it. There's self-care aspects to it. There's so many aspects to it. And I tried to figure out, well, everybody told you niche down, niche down. You need to find your niche in the coaching industry. And so I kept trying to find my niche. Well, I'll be a productivity coach. Will I be like a personal growth coach and help people with their mindset? I think I did clarity coaching for a while. Like I've been dabbling in this since 2014. So we're coming up on 10 years. And I tried so many different things. And I think that's almost something that sometimes entrepreneurs have to do is you have to let yourself experiment and figure out what feels right. And there's some sense of listening to people and letting people guide you, but I feel like I was almost listening to people too much. And it's when I stopped listening to people that I finally realized, holy crap, it's burnout. Like, where was I when I was in grad school? I was burned out. So that's really kind of how I found my path and found my niche and what led me to start my business because frankly, nothing has been as fulfilling for me. I have publications in science journals and nothing has been as fulfilling for me as coaching people through burnout.
And so I'm going to ask a question, but I just wanted to touch on how beautiful that was that you had to dabble to see where your passion lied
hmm
of bringing you that fulfillment, bringing you
hmm
that joy. And when something is joyful and fulfilling, it's
hmm
easy.
hmm hmm Absolutely. And I think we should seek out that passion. We should seek out that fulfillment. We should seek out, I feel like the more I work with entrepreneurs, because I love working with entrepreneurs as a burnout coach, the more I hear from them, I want things to be more peaceful. I want to have ease. I want to have freedom. And when we try to force ourselves to do something that, so and so, coach that we've worked with or so and so guru online tells us we quote unquote should do. Like should is one of my least favorite words because 90% of the time when we're saying the word, oh, I should do this, it's coming from a disempowering place. It's coming from a place that doesn't feel good. So it was a lot of I spent a long time chasing the shoulds. And then when I finally stopped listening to the shoulds, it was, oh my God, this is where my passion lies. This is what fires me up and lights me up. What I genuinely like learning about, what I genuinely like talking about. this is it. And as soon as I found burnout, this is how you know you found your niche as an entrepreneur. As soon as I found burnout, I have never had any desire to pivot to any other niche. And before, it was always just like, well, maybe I could do this. Well, maybe I could do this. I was constantly on the hunt for the next thing. And I'm so like established now. And I'm like, this is where I'm staying and I'm not going anywhere. Burnout is it for like the rest of entrepreneurship. Unless I have like a dramatic other life experience that changes it, burnout is it. And I feel like that's the feeling that I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs are seeking.
Oh, yes, yes. Like when you find your pillars, you're
Hmm.
set.
Hmm.
Like everything you do is that, and that is who you are.
Hmm.
But the question I was going to ask is, we might not know what burnout feels like.
Yeah.
So can you help us understand how it feels like, how we can identify?
Absolutely, absolutely. So there's a couple different types of burnout, and not everybody breaks it down like this, but I think it's important for us to rationalize it and understand it to break it down into types. And I'm going to start with the one that feels the most familiar and then move to the ones that are going to feel probably the least familiar, especially if you have any people who are like that very type A, like Enneagram 3 high achiever personality. There's types that are going to feel super familiar and types that are going to feel not. So the first type that I'm going to talk about is the physical side of burnout. And the physical side of burnout looks like a depth of exhaustion, like such a depth of exhaustion that it feels like no amount of sleep or rest is going to help correct it. So I'm talking like, oh, I just slept 12 hours a night, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the entire weekend, and I still wake up Monday morning and I'm dragging and I feel like death. That's that depth of exhaustion. But I feel like other sides of it can look like, and this is actually a really, really good one to look for, you're getting sick more frequently. So, like for some of us, and I hear people say this all the time, I haven't been sick in years. My immune system is amazing. And suddenly I've been sick for like 3 weeks and my body can't shake it. Now, that's different than like a long-term COVID, or I do think there's like a cold going around that right now that I feel like people are, still coughing like 4 weeks later, like they feel fine, but there's still a cough there. So there are exceptions to this rule, but I'm definitely talking about like repeated illness or prolonged illness when that is really abnormal for you. That's a big sign. And also just like changes in your basic self-care patterns. Like if you're typically a morning person and suddenly you're not, or you were typically, have very high energy in the afternoon and your energy levels just feel like they're all over the place, or you have no appetite, or for whatever reason, you just, can't fall asleep and you're typically a really good sleeper, those are some signs of physical burnout. And it's those shifts from normal that I think are really important to pay attention to too. We all know kind of what our normal energy levels might feel like, or our normal self-care patterns and our normal appetite levels feel like. When you see that shift from normal, that's something to pay attention to, especially if it doesn't shift back quickly. If it's like a day or two, that, oh, my appetite's weird for a day or two, that's nothing to worry about. But if it's like been weeks and your appetite is still off, maybe you're not hungry or you're ravenous, whatever that shift is, that's something to pay attention to. So that's kind of the physical side. So depth of exhaustion, getting sick more frequently or for prolonged periods of time, and shifts in your self-care patterns. The next one is overwhelm burnout. And I kind of think of this being like the productivity side of burnout. And what this one really looks like, there's a couple of expressions that I feel like this one really relates back to, like that feeling of having too many tabs open in your brain. I love that expression because we all know what it's like to have too many tabs open on our computer. Like our computer's bogged down, it's slow, like we can't open up a new tab without it feeling like our entire computer's going to crash. Our brain can feel like that too. Like we might have difficulty finding information that's typically very easy for us to recall. So feeling like you have too many tabs open in your brain, that's overwhelm, but it's also like an inability to get started on projects, or an inability to focus, or an inability to make decisions, that kind of analysis paralysis and indecisiveness. Again, especially if you're somebody who's very decisive. You're somebody who's usually very good at, getting stuff done and making decisions definitively and quickly. If you see that shift, that just is probably a sign that your brain is overwhelmed. And simultaneously with that, an inability to turn off. I see that a lot with entrepreneurs because I feel like we're constantly immersed in our business. We're constantly thinking about this piece of content or that thing that we could create and launch. And that's awesome and that's great. But if you're finding that you are connecting with loved ones, or you are out with your significant other or something like that, or just spending time with friends, and your brain is off somewhere else. Your brain is off thinking about your business and you just can't get yourself focused. And again, it's not like a for one day thing. It's like a every time you show up and try to connect with people for weeks on end, months on end. Or maybe it's when you go to sleep. That's usually how it shows up for me. If I'm in overwhelm burnout, I'm tired, I'm yawning up a storm, but I put my head down on the pillow and my brain's just going. I actually keep a notebook next to my bed just in case that happens. So I can literally like brain dump all the things into my notebook. So that's kind of the overwhelm side of burnout. And the last one is emotional burnout. I feel like this is the one that most people, this is like the kind of sneaky fly under the radar one that most people, it's very pervasive. Like it's something that can really like just like sink its teeth into your life, but you might have no concept that it's going on. And what this one looks like is, first and foremost, I always say this one looks like emotional reactivity, because when we are in emotional burnout, we are usually quick to anger or quick to tears. Kind of depends on your personality. I find the quick to tears is definitely more with women. I've had numerous clients, and I myself have experienced this, where you're like trying to just have like explain a situation that's going on. And when you start explaining it, you don't feel triggered. You're just telling the story. It is what it is. But then all of a sudden you feel that emotion start to build up and you literally can't explain what's going on without just breaking down in tears.
Yeah, I
That's,
get
and
that.
I was going to tell by your face that is that an experience you've had? Yeah.
Yes, yes. Like, I don't know. It's just, let me finish what I'm saying.
Yeah. I actually find that this happens to me over Christmas. I hate it. What makes it worse for me is when I feel coddled by people when I'm trying to explain what's going on and everybody's being like, Are you okay? Like, is everything all right?" Like, and I have a bunch of people coming at me asking that. I feel like that adds, it almost like compiles overwhelm with whatever emotional exhaustion I might be experiencing in that moment. And then I'm just like, I feel like when a computer glitches, that feels like it's what's going on in my brain, and I don't like that feeling, so it makes me cry. But yeah, emotional reactivity is huge with emotional burnout, but I feel like what it can also look like is when we're really emotionally reactive, for some personality types, not all, we tend to isolate ourselves when we're in situation like that. So if you're kind of socially isolating yourself, you're really distancing yourself from your close relationships. That social isolation can also be a sign of emotional burnout, because it's usually that goes together with the emotional reactivity. We know things are going on in our world. We don't necessarily maybe know how to articulate them, and so we kind of hide. We kind of distance ourselves from the people in our life, because this is a very common thing for a lot of people, not just high achievers, but they're just really bad at it. We don't want to burden other people with our emotions. So when we know we're going through stuff and we know we're emotionally reactive and we know we're not being the best version of ourselves, we tend to like keep people at arm's length and socially
Like,
isolate ourselves.
shut
So
down.
that's another, yeah, and shut down. So like if you see your social life is going downhill, that can be a sign of emotional burnout. But I think one of the biggest ones to look out for with this, again, especially for that kind of high achiever Enneagram 3 personality, I work with a lot of high achievers in my work, as you might already kind of get a feel for. But like if you're just like very apathetic and disinterested and you're lacking motivation and you're just not feeling like in alignment is a word that I hear people use a lot, that is another big sign of emotional burnout, because again, a high achiever, we're typically very driven, very engaged, very self-motivated, very like on the ball. And we care a lot about the things that we're doing, even if we don't necessarily care about like, oh, this individual piece of work that I'm doing, it's adding to a higher mission and it's adding something that feels makes us feel very validated and very worthy and very fulfilled. So we can get ourselves excited for it. But if you see that switch where it's just nothing feels worth showing up for, nothing is motivating you, nothing is making you feel passionate or lighting you up, that is a massive sign that you're probably in emotional burnout, especially if you've been in that place for an extended period of time. So I know that was a long answer to your question, but that's kind of what burnout looks like in various different ways in our lives.
No, I loved it. I took some notes. So, what do we do when our normal is burnout?
I'm so glad you asked that. I literally posted something on Instagram probably a year ago now where I said, if like you're basically, I said something akin to, If your busy season never ends, that's not a busy season, it's your life. And so when you are in that, the first thing I always recommend doing, I actually like, don't mind me, I'm literally gonna pull up like my Instagram DMs because my friend asked me this recently. A very good friend of mine, she was one of my very, very first coaching clients I ever worked with. I have a tendency to like become very good friends with my coaching clients, which is great, but also like I can't work with them once we get to be like really good friends, you know? Like I get to that point where, oh, well, maybe we need to stop working together. But she asked me that. I posted something on Monday of this week as we're recording this about how, you know, you might be feeling those Sunday scaries, those Monday blues of like, I just want to quit my job and I just want to go back to work. And that's literally exactly what she asked me. She said something along the lines of like, I feel like I'm doing everything right. I feel like I'm setting boundaries. I'm telling people my workload is too much, but I feel paralyzed. That was actually the word that she used, was she felt paralyzed. And she's like, I don't know how to get through the day ahead of me, much less the week ahead of me. And what I told her is, first and foremost, and I think this is a really important thing to think about, even when you're making decisions, don't focus on the rest of the week. Don't even focus on the rest of the day. Focus on what's in front of you. Because I think that's where the overwhelm starts to come in. Is we have this thing in front of us, but we're so distracted by what we have later in the day or what we have later in the week or what we have coming in the coming weekend or what we have coming later in the month. We're focusing too far ahead and it's creating overwhelm. So focus on what's in front of you. Focus on the meeting that's in front of you, the hour that's in front of you, and what you need to get done in that hour. Because paralysis happens once we look too far ahead. So that would be one tip I would say for people, is to just focus on the next thing in front of you. And then I would say the second thing that's really important is to focus on the minimums. And this is important when we're talking about self care, when we're talking about our to do list, when we're talking about our social commitments. Because one thing to know about burnout is incredibly holistic. Like, this is actually one thing that I'm a little pissed off at the World Health Organization's definition of burnout, is they say burnout is an occupational phenomenon and that we can't apply burnout to other areas of our life. And that is yeah, exactly. It's like utter BS. It is so untrue. Like, anybody who has ever experienced burnout knows that I don't think any human is good enough at compartmentalizing the stress in one part of their life away from the other parts of their life. If you're burnout or overwhelmed in one part of your life, it is going to bleed into other parts of your life. Like, it's stupid. So, like, set minimums. And when I say that, the minimum amount of self care, like the minimum amount of socializing. I think what gets a lot of us in trouble is we kind of think, especially again, that high achiever brain, we think, to be doing enough in my life, to be good enough in my life, I need to be crushing it at work. I need to be crushing it in my relationships. I need to be crushing it in my health, physical and mental. I need to be crushing it in my personal goals, in my sleep, in my habits. Like, it's like we have to be crushing it everywhere to feel like we are living well. And when you are in this state of paralysis, when you are in that depth of overwhelm, that's, hey, it's not going to happen. If you try to go into it with that mentality, you are literally setting yourself up for failure. It's a lose-lose situation. So focus on the minimums. So, like, what would, not what you would like to get done, what 100% like has to get done that day. Not what would you like to do in terms of health and wellness and self-care, but what is the minimum you can make space for today? Like I told you, I'm going to go on a walk after this. If I was in burnout and overwhelm, and I would admittedly have to kind of self coach myself through this, I'd have to talk myself down. I would be like, no, you have to go on a 45-minute walk, blah, 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 and do this whole loop and walk for this amount of time. No, that would be what my ideal is telling me. But what I would need to talk myself down to is, Ellen, if you get outside for 5, 10, 15 minutes and go for a walk, that's enough. Or if you can't even get outside because you just have too much on your plate that day, if you can take 5 minutes to do some stretching, that's enough. Or if you can't even do that, Ellen, if you can get to bed at a decent time tonight and get 8 hours of sleep tonight, that's enough. Like, what's the minimum? What is the one thing that you have space for and that you have room for? And just focus on that, because there's too much of a focus on the I like to get this done, I have to get this done, and not enough focus on, okay, what do I actually have space to get done?
Right. And we were talking earlier about COVID. and how
Mhm.
COVID like shut the world down and made everybody like pause and stop. And
Mhm.
I think that's when burnout really started to become more well known because
Mhm.
people didn't realize that they were living in a daily state of burnout.
Mhm.
And I think that's one of the beauties about becoming an entrepreneur is you can decide
Yep.
your schedule. Like I have a set block. I don't take meetings before 9 a.m.
Mhm.
because I had such a dread of getting out of bed at a certain hour and making it to work at a certain time. And it's like, no, I don't want to do that anymore. So
Absolutely.
now
I've
I
even been trying to like push it back to 10 a.m. because I like the leisurely morning. I don't like having to be like super rigid in how I spend my morning. So I've been following your lead with the 9 a.m., but I'm kind of almost contemplating should I push it back further to give myself more space for this self care and the stuff that pours into me. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead and keep
no,
going.
it's fine. I have a routine that like I tidy up my kitchen every morning while my coffee is
Oh, I
being
should do that.
made. And then I go outside and I listen to these mini stories
Hmm.
um, while I'm having my coffee with the birds.
Hmm. Yep. Yeah, it's those little things. I love that how you framed that because I remember I had a client that I worked with this past year who was a realtor. I'm realizing more and more too. This is almost like my own bias. Is I think of entrepreneur and like business owner, and I think of like somebody who's a coach or has like online courses or is a VA or something. And I don't realize that like financial advisors and realtors, they're basically entrepreneurs. So I apologize to all the financial advisors and realtors out there because I didn't really think about how self-driven their work is. But I had this client that I worked with this past year who was a realtor, and I remember when we finished working together and she wrote her testimonial and sent it to me, that was one of the things she said something akin to, I was so surprised that recovering from burnout and managing the burnout in my life and the stress in my life didn't mean like a this complete life overhaul. It literally was these small habits that she built her life around that made her feel good. And
Yeah.
it's as simple and as complicated as that is identifying what those small habits are. And yes, having the consistency and the discipline to make sure that you do them. This is like the one part of our lives that I do feel like we need to have discipline in. Like, I don't feel like it's about discipline of completing your to-do list and like making sure that you're getting up at 5 a.m. every morning. No, I actually feel like the discipline, the most important disciplines in our lives is making sure we're constantly showing up to do the things that are the most important for pouring into us. Like whether that's self-care or social or whatever. That's honestly the thing that we need to be the most disciplined about in our lives, especially if we're somebody who is prone to stressing and burning ourselves out.
Oh, definitely. And then when you were talking about overwhelm burnout, that with
Mhm.
the analysis paralysis and all that,
Yeah.
that sounded a lot like executive dysfunction.
Hmm. Hmm.
So is it a result of burnout or is burnout a result of executive
Ooh,
dysfunction?
I would say with people who have executive dysfunction, and actually, side note, I'm a professional tutor outside of my business. So I work with students, and I'm actually literally in the process of getting like a learning differences certification right now. So I actually love that you asked this question. I would definitely say burnout doesn't cause executive dysfunction. I would say executive dysfunction can cause burnout. So if anything, I think that would be the causality there because if we have executive dysfunction, we don't have good systems in place. We don't have good, habits in place for, brain dumping or wrangling the chaos in our lives is kind of what I like to say. And that is something that can then in turn cause overwhelm burnout, but I wouldn't say it's the other way around. Usually there is a cause for burnout, and I wouldn't say burnout causes anything in terms of especially in that context. Yes, burnout can cause issues with your health. Burnout can cause issues with your relationships. Burnout and depression are actually very very linked. I actually think this is a big reason why burnout is not a medical diagnosis. You can't go to your doctor and say, "Hey, I think I'm burned out, diagnose me." Like that's not how burnout works. Burnout is a phenomenon that is like loosely and tangentially linked to all sorts of other things. So like I call it emotional burnout, but somebody else might call it depression. And I think depression would have more scientific and more measurable things that people could look at to determine that you are burned out or to determine that you are depressed, whereas burnout doesn't really have that. So that's definitely something to think about with burnout is like executive dysfunction. Those are things that we can diagnose and they might be linked to burnout, but those are the diagnosable things. And then burnout is, I actually feel like a lot of doctors will treat burnout as like a symptom of that. Like you have ADHD or you have, insert other learning difference here. Burnout might be a symptom that would come along with that because you've been trying so hard to compensate for the executive dysfunction or the learning difference. Like that's where burnout can start to come in.
Okay, good to know because I feel like I have executive dysfunction and
Mhm.
probably undiagnosed ADHD.
Mhm.
But because I was an executive assistant for 20 plus years, I had to create systems for
Yeah.
myself to be able to function better because it was as simple as I couldn't remember what my boss told me to do from his desk to my desk, which was like
Mhm.
5 steps.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, I think one of the biggest things that I've created for myself, I really wonder sometimes if I have like undiagnosed ADHD. But yeah, I think some people have very much learned, and I think that's why some people don't get, diagnosed until later in their life, is because they've learned how to function with whatever their executive dysfunction might be. And similarly, one of the things that I do that I think helps me so much is if I think of something, and it literally could be like, take out the trash or check the mail. And I'm not even shitting you when I say, sorry, I shouldn't have sworn, but I'm not even kidding you when I say, like, I have those as recurring tasks in my task manager because I know I will forget. I had a pile of garbage that piled up in my kitchen. I was like, Ellen, just walk around the corner and take it to the garbage thing. But I just kept forgetting because I kept getting distracted by other things. So, like, I put those, I capture it as soon as I think of it. Ellen, you need to take out the trash. Boop, goes in the to do list. Like, Ellen, you need to go check your mail. Boop, goes into the to do list. I capture everything that I think of. And I think that's just a good habit to get into because it frees up your brain to do the things that our brains are actually meant for. Our brains are terrible filing cabinets. I think school screwed us over in so many ways because school trained us that memorization is the end all be all, and that is BS. That's not how our brains are meant to work. Our brains are meant to create and innovate and come up with ideas, and that's how our brains are meant to function, not to be able to memorize and recall things.
And research.
Yeah, and research. Dude, former scientist right here. I research the shit out of things. I'm real good at that.
Oh,
This is something that a lot of people do wrong when it comes to stress management, when it comes to burnout management. It's part of the reason why instead of like I offer a membership as part of my coaching because I think it's really important to think about this is not stuff that you ever walk away from. Like once you start realizing, especially if you were that personality that has to like is very prone to burnout and is very prone to overwork and overwhelm and overscheduling and just stressing yourself sick, it is first and foremost about the things that you do consistently. And that's why I think it's so important to focus on the small things because like going for a 45-minute to a 90-minute walk every single day is going to be hard to fit in a busy season. Like 100%. We have to have things that are small that we can fit in. I think the most important thing when I talk about routines and habits with my clients is I talk about your routine and your habit has to adapt to the really busy day and the day where you have a little bit more room. So, like, if we're talking about going for a walk every day, okay, cool. On a busy day, just do it for 5 minutes. But on a less busy day, you can do it for 90 minutes. That's a habit that is very adaptable to however much time you have. And I think that's really, really important because it's not about doing it for that 3 months where you feel really burned out or when you're recovering from burning out. It's about doing it consistently long term. Because if you don't, burnout will come back. I literally talk about a burnout cycle for high achievers because I have seen it play out time and time again with clients where they literally every 3 months, every 6 months, every year, every 2 years will burn out. And that's because they stop doing the things that help.
oh, that's so beautiful. I was going to ask, do you have any final thoughts?
I mean, I have so many final thoughts. I mean, I don't even know how to tie it up in a bow, but whatever you're doing, I would say we've got to make space for ourselves. We've got to make space to slow down and to assess what's working and what's not working in our lives. And we've got to have compassion for ourselves. And I know, and I hear it all the time, that so many people think self compassion is going to mean complacency. No, it isn't. Because frankly, if you overwhelm and overwork yourself because you're not being compassionate, because you have completely unattainable, aspirations and unattainable goals and routines that you're putting yourself through, you are not only setting yourself up for failure, but you are setting yourself up for the exact things that you're trying to prevent. Like, people say, I don't want to get complacent. Well, complacency, I would assume, means you don't want to get lazy, you don't want to get unmotivated, you don't want to get undisciplined, and you don't want to get disengaged, right? We literally just talked about the fact that emotional burnout is disengagement, it's a lack of motivation, and it's basically you getting lazy. So, that complacency that we're scared of by not being compassionate with ourselves is literally the exact thing that can happen when you overwork, overwhelm, and overschedule yourself, when you get into burnout. So, food for thought.
Well, thank you so much, Coach Ellyn. And to get a hold of her, all of her information will be in the show notes.